Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. Today's episode 91, and we're actually doing something new today. We're kicking off what I'm calling the M&A Series. So we're actually bringing on former guests who've been on the show and told us about their companies and their stories, who have gone through a merger or acquisition to talk about that process, to talk about their experience. Whether it's selling their company or merging or buying another company or merging with another company. I think it's something that is not really spoken about too much within the immigration and global mobility industry. But it's really important. And a lot of companies, startups are launched with, some sort of an exit in mind. So I'm excited to kick off this series and bring it to all the listeners. I'm really excited to hear these stories. Our guest today is Ryan Keintz. He is the co-founder and president of PricePoint. And PricePoint is effectively an online tool and pricing a platform that allows companies in the relocation industry and individuals who are relocating around the world or locally within a country to get price transparency and make their move easier, more cost efficient, et cetera. PricePoint recently emerged with a company called Cend, C-E-N-D, that does moving. It's a moving marketplace, and so we're going to hear all about how that went down with our guest Ryan. I'm Roman Zelchenko, your host. I'm a former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur and the founder of Laborless, an H-1B visa compliance automation platform, as well as the founder of GMI Rocket, which is a marketing agency for the immigration mobility industry, and of course, which brings you this show. So without further ado, Ryan, thank you so much for being here and for coming on and sharing this this exciting moment in your life and in the company's life, and appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Before we do get started with the episode, I do want to thank our sponsor for the GMI Rocket Show, Lex Reception. So I want to tell you a little bit about them. Lex Reception is a legal intake reception and client support service, from answering phone calls and messages in real time to appointment scheduling. Lex Reception supports clients with 24/7 legal answering specialists, which means that you, as an immigration lawyer or other type of legal professional, you don't have to worry about missing calls from clients or prospects. Lex Reception also does outbound service, so they can actually proactively reach out to folks who have submitted a request on your website, your law firm website, or otherwise contacted your law firm. And they integrate with platforms that lawyers use, like Clio and Practice Panther and LawPay, et cetera, to fit into lawyers' workflow. So thank you, Lex Reception, for sponsoring the show. For folks who listen to it, you do get $250 off your first month of service with Lex Reception. The link for that is in the show notes or the description of the show, wherever you're watching and listening to it, or just reach out to Lex Reception and just tell them you heard about them through the GMI Rocket Show. So with that said, Ryan, appreciate it. So first of all, congratulations. Really exciting news.
Yeah, thank you.
I know, you were a guest on the show previously. For folks who are listening who may not have checked out that episode, I do recommend you going back. It was just so interesting. And, I think I talk about immigration a lot, but moving and relocation is part of the, broader global mobility kind of supply chain, if you will. And at least immigration lawyers, we often don't think about, oh, well, what happens after we get the visa, right? Like, what are the actual things that need to happen? Moving is the thing. The person has to move, their stuff has to move, their animals have to move, et cetera. And so, I think it's so important to bring in the stories across the supply chain of a relocation, not just the visa part of it. So could you share, maybe for folks who haven't listened to it or whatnot, could you share kind of maybe a summary of how you came to start PricePoint? I know you worked in the industry for a number of years in the moving industry at some really large companies, and you saw something that needed to be fixed, as what many entrepreneurs do, and built something. Can you talk just a little bit about that before we dive into the story of how this merger eventually came about?
Sure. So I think I should probably give a real brief summary on what preceded starting PricePoint. And I think we might have talked about this last time, so I'll keep it brief. But I kind of stumbled into the international moving industry right out of college, working for one of the largest companies in the world at their headquarters in Chicago. Started there, and the first 6 to 12 months, I was sort of an operations coordination role, which is a really good starting point, I think, for anyone in the industry. It was the nuts and bolts of actual international moving services and all the logistics that goes behind that. It was a cool opportunity. Really surprising that I ended up there, but straight out of college with a degree in international business, it was kind of cool that I was doing actual international logistics and corresponding with people around the world. And this was literally with fax machines at the time. I graduated in 1998, and we didn't even have email yet. And dealing with foreign currency exchange and all that stuff. So I had a really good grounded opening experience. But then I migrated more into sort of big picture pricing functions within the company, particularly corporate pricing agreements is kind of where my career really got traction. And I think I had certain skills that fit that well. So it's when large Fortune 500 companies are doing contracts with large moving or relo companies. There's a whole pricing mechanism that goes behind that. And long story short, it was that was a tremendously dysfunctional process for the industry, particularly pre-internet. And I saw a lot of dysfunction there, both sort of internally, what I would call the wholesale, which is how different moving companies around the world deal with each other and exchange pricing information. Very analog, very tedious process. And then a completely disconnected process was how those moving companies engage with the corporate buyers. And really the short version there is corporations try to structure these large global pricing agreements, but they generally don't know what they're doing. So they create these agreements that they think are going to achieve savings, but they typically don't, because the agreements that they come up with are just rife with loopholes. And the moving industry is really proficient at exploiting those loopholes. And I always say, I'm not here to trash talk the industry. It's not the supplier's fault. They're basically forced, when you have this environment where you come into an RFP, you're incentivized to offer as low of a price as you can. It's called bid low, invoice high. So you try to win the contract, and then when you actually win it, anyone in this industry knows you kind of exploit all of the gray area that they didn't think to include. So I was actually really good at playing that game, but I didn't particularly like playing the game. I just saw how it was commonplace for the industry. And I really kind of struggled. I was kind of obsessed with this problem that I saw. I spent probably 5-10 years of my early career actually thinking, I see the problem, but I don't know how to fix it. And I kind of stewed on that problem for years, and eventually kind of had sort of a light bulb eureka moment, which in short was that I mentioned how there's this wholesale internal pricing mechanism and the retail external to the corporate. They were completely disjointed. And the basic idea is, wow, you could actually solve both of those problems with one platform. If you could get the industry to adopt a more common protocol in the internet space. And I was kind of thinking about this around 2007, 2008. If you could solve that problem, get the industry onto a common protocol, then you could extend that to those corporate buyers who are trying to figure this out for themselves and say, hey, we've got a catered model here that you can get reliable competitive pricing that you're not going to be exploited on. And meanwhile, we take out all of this dysfunctional game playing, which I think is a huge distraction for the industry, and in a variety of ways also impacts quality service. So I just thought what really attracted me to it was that you could kind of hit two birds with one stone, solve both of those problems. And I always saw it as a win-win, that you can solve it for the corporate buyer, which was kind of the what I saw as the primary party to solve for, but do it in a way that the suppliers in the industry would like too, or at least the ones that are like me, tired of playing the game. It's like, let's make everything transparent. Let's make it above board. And I thought there was a lot of benefit if we could pull that off. So I left my normie job at the very end of 2009 and started the company early 2010.
Wow. One thing that comes to mind whenever anyone shares a story like that is, when you find an exploitation within the industry, there's a desire to solve it because the exploitation exploits an inefficiency, but there's people making money on that.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's tough because you have to go to them and say, hey, this thing, I know you don't like it and it's kind of a game, but you're making money off of it. I want to build a company that gets rid of that inefficiency, but so that at the same time gets rid of that revenue stream. That's a tough
Yeah.
game to, it's a tough sell sometimes. But I think overall, to your point, the pitch is, look, yes, you're making money off of it because it's an inefficiency, but you didn't get into this industry to exploit, an arbitrage in price. You got into this
Right.
industry to help people move from place to place, to provide a good service, to make logistics better, more efficient, maybe more sustainable now as we're ending 2023. Just curious, before we get into the story of how things have ended up, did you find it early on difficult to make that pitch where people are like, no, I don't want to get rid of this price arbitrage. I like it. It's it impacts positively our bottom line. Was that ever kind of an
Oh,
issue,
yeah.
or are you just
Well, not quite in those terms. I definitely hugely underestimated that part of it.
Mhm.
I don't think it's in most cases it's not a conscious um, decision that they're making. It they're The exploitation is often so ingrained in the organizational structures that there's this sort of inertia of how business is
Mhm.
done that people aren't explicitly saying. I mean, a lot of people inherently resist change. Okay, we know that. But what I underestimated is that there was this sort of like, call it an unconscious resistance within the organizations because their org structures and people's roles and here's why I come to work and here's my job every day. There's just all this kind of latent resistance that some people find explicitly threatening when you come with the new thing. But even if they don't, there is that sort of unconscious resistance. And I think I really underestimated that part of it. But at the same time, with any new technology, the task is really find the early adopters because they do
Right.
exist. And fortunately, found a good handful of people who, when I explained the vision, like they got it, they were on board, and they were supportive. And it certainly wouldn't have gone anywhere without that. And it's pretty remarkable too, because yes, it is in a way what we were doing was disrupting and kind of interrupting this normal status quo. So it's really great that there are companies that embrace that. But even
Mhm.
within that, what we've also experienced, so we've had a couple platforms, one called Mover to Mover that we offer to the moving companies, solves that internal wholesale problem, and another one targeted towards the corporate buyers. And so within that mover space, what you would also see happen is we'll make our pitch to a manager or executive level person within the company. Hey, you should adopt this platform. It'll benefits, whatever. And they're on board with it. They get it. They say, okay, we're signing up. But then they experience that organizational resistance internally, where
Mhm.
they now need to try to get their people and their staff on board with it. And that's a whole nother area of resistance, and often more resistance there because that's where you're threatening people's roles and their identity. And, I do things this way and we don't want to do it that way. So, yeah, there's definitely been that, but happy to say we did find a lot of champions along the way as well.
I would say, from my experience with Laborless, we, felt the hardest thing in the beginning was to find those early adopters who will
Yeah.
get it. And they're out there. I think people just underestimate that. I think if you believe that they're out there, even if the first 10, 15, 20 people say no, it's not because your idea is actually bad. It's because those aren't the people that are ready for it at that moment. They'll be
Yeah.
ready for it when everyone around them starts using it.
Right.
And, they'll say, okay, fine. But you got to just keep digging and find those few people who are just totally willing to try something new. They're always out there. I think they're in every single industry. It just, demoralizing when you start your company and you're so excited and you're also taking a huge risk and all these, you finally get it to a place where you can pitch it to prospects and they're like, no, for whatever
Right.
reason.
Yeah.
So
And the key thing is, I didn't learn this right away, and I don't have a ton of advice, but one of them is don't waste time on the naysayers. Like,
mm,
there's a compulsion to kind of debate them and try to win them over. And I think your time is much better spent going and find the ones where it just clicks with them. It's like spend your time finding them.
Yeah, that's great advice. And honestly, I think how you cut off that conversation is really key. So you wouldn't say, "Oh, well, screw you." You would say, "Great, I understand where you're coming from. Maybe let's touch base in 6 months or a year to see where you're at." A way where you can re-engage them down the road and not burn those bridges. But I think early on, like I remember, I would be angry. I mean, I'd be really like, "What do you mean
Right.
you don't understand?
Right.
Like this is the best thing." So anyway, so you found those early adopters. Obviously, the company, continued to grow and more people adopted it. I've obviously known your CEO Ben for a while, and he is prolific at speaking and attending things, and so many people use PricePoint regardless of or I guess I should say depending on where they sit in the industry. And so and then a month ago, or actually we're in December of 2023, and a month ago, or last month I should say, it was announced. Ben posted this thing, and there's a press release that PricePoint was merged with a company called Cend, CEND, which was I don't want to say a shock, but I think when we're so used to reading TechCrunch, where first you hear about Series A, and then you hear Series B, and then you sort of see companies on that path. So I think it was a really interesting and pleasant surprise, and obviously so much congratulations to you and Ben and the whole team on social media and at events. And of course, I was like, Ryan, please, this is awesome. Please come on to the show, and can you talk about this? So I'm so happy that you're here. Can you talk a little bit about? Obviously, everyone wants to know how it happened, but what were some of the things that were transpiring maybe within the company or within the industry in general that put you on that path of going through a merger or acquisition? Because it's a big step. It's a big step in any company's life, especially a company that is that was started by you started it, it's your baby, and letting go of your baby in a way is wonderful but also scary. So what are some of those things that maybe you can talk about that were transpiring before this merger started to come about?
I had sort of a real shift in my perspective. I think it was sort of around May of this year, and there's some somewhat recent history during the COVID years that maybe we'd want to dig into. We almost did an acquisition a few years ago during COVID, and we can get in that if you'd like. But to keep it in the present,
no, let's definitely dig into that, because I think that leads really nicely into how this transpired and maybe even the differences between the two. Yeah.
Okay. And so for what it's worth, PricePoint was started as a bootstrap startup, meaning we had no outside investors. It was myself and my co-founder. And part of the challenge there is you have to actually figure out how you're going to make revenue. Most VC funded companies will raise millions of dollars, sometimes billions, before they've even figured out a revenue model. So we started as bootstrap, figured out a revenue model that covered our costs, actually got to a point of being profitable. I was actually paying myself a decent salary. And then sort of our next grow up stage was, and this was when Ben came on the company, is we did bring in some outside investors. And that sort of allowed us to scale up next level. So we call that angel investor or Series A. I don't know. I don't care, but we had some early investors that let us scale up a bit. And then, so as of 2019, our trajectory was really good. We had a series of, we'd had win after win after win with like really big Fortune 100 companies that were adopting our corporate model. It's like, okay, this is working. And as of 2019, we were just on the verge. We were going to have a breakout revenue year in 2020. Then what happened? COVID. And COVID just totally threw a wrench into the whole international relocation industry. And our business model, our revenue was directly proportional to moving volume, corporate. So if we have 5,000 corporate moves going through our platform, and then COVID happens and now we have 2,000, our revenue goes down
Right.
by just about that much.
Right.
And we were on a moderate burn with cash burn with investor money. Nothing crazy like, your typical VC burns, but we were on a moderate burn, and all of a sudden our burn rate doubled, which means our runway got cut in half. And mid 2020, it was very uncertain where the world was going. But volumes had just, totally cratered. And it's like, okay, red flag, what's going to happen with our business model? And so there was a particular point that Ben and I were discussing this. And I said, I don't think there's that quote from the movie Jaws, we're going to need a bigger boat. It was something like that, in part because for a long time, I've viewed the bootstrap startup as being sort of like you're in a dinky little sailboat going out into the ocean in big waves, and you got to stay afloat, not get capsized. And so for COVID, it was all of a sudden, wow, there's a big hurricane coming in, and we need to be on a bigger boat. So we specifically started looking at possible acquisition opportunities for us to be acquired. And serendipity, there was a company that took really big interest in us, sort of mid to late 2020. They were a really well-funded SPAC, SPAC. Many of you know what that means, but they had a lot of cash in the coffers, and were focusing specifically in the international mobility space. We popped onto their radar, and they came after us. They wanted us to merge, put a really attractive offer in front of us. They were on the verge of going public. And initially they wanted to bring us on board right before they went public. But that the timing didn't work out well on that. We basically had an LOI, letter of intent, that we were going to go forward with them. But the deal wasn't going to get done before they went public. So it got put on pause for about a month or two while they went through that whole going public. They're a NASDAQ traded company, but they still very much wanted to do the deal with us, and so did we. But when they went public, they had a whole new board come in, and with the new board coming in, the board wanted to significantly restructure our deal, which we were okay with how the deal was originally restructured. But then it was this intensive 6+ month due diligence cycle, which is just staggering. Unfortunately, most of that did not fall on me. We had other people in the company managing most of that process, but it was really in depth. Took a long time. I mean, they must have spent 6 figures on legal fees, going through it. And the key thing is, so even though you have the letter of intent and here's the deal structure, there's a whole lot of the deal that isn't pre-negotiated, or it's like, well, we're going to figure that out as we go through the due diligence. And these guys, they were vacuuming up a lot of small companies like us in our space, doing a number of different deals. And so I think it's fair to say they really knew how to play that game to their advantage, that as you're going through the due diligence and ironing out the fine points, a bunch of little things that would then get negotiated are getting negotiated in a way where it's like, that seems a bit more favorable to them. And that's adding more risk into the deal from our standpoint, more uncertainty. So the deal was kind of just inch by inch getting not as good for us. And in the meantime, since the due diligence took so long, there was more clarity on the light at the end of the tunnel as it comes to COVID. And we did have a more, the volumes had started turning back on a bit. Our revenues were rebounding. Okay, we think we're going to be through this. And so we weren't in such a period of risk and desperation to make that deal. And I don't know if it was quite the 11th hour, but maybe at least 10:30. We decided, sorry, like the deal isn't worth it anymore. In the meantime, part of that was possible because we had another investor potentially coming on who was willing to give us pretty equivalent level of funding cash that we would have gotten from this deal. And so I was like, oh, well, instead of having to sell the whole company for that much money, we can give away a chunk of the company's equity for similar funds. And let's see if we can scale it ourselves. That was the whole idea. It's like, if we did that merger, it was all about now we can really try to scale big time, the things that's really difficult when you're a bootstrap. Like we would have this big organization, big money behind us.
Mm-hmm.
So it was sort of like, yeah, let's not do the deal. Let's try to do it ourselves, scale it to that next level. So I think that's a good segue to the present. We had about a 2-year window there, and we weren't able to scale as like we had hoped. And, COVID was still an ongoing challenge. But it was, we had, prior to COVID, every year was getting incrementally better and better and better and better. We had a good growth curve going. So the idea was, with this funding, we're going to now make the big move up, and that didn't happen for a variety of reasons. So, and I would say it was a couple of things. Like I said, we targeted as our client audiences the movers and the corporate
Mm-hmm.
buyers. We already talked about how movers are inherently a bit resistant to change, or not just movers, but any industry. And meanwhile, on the corporate space, we'd had this track record of major wins,
Mm-hmm.
and you would kind of think that the industry would take notice, and that a crowd would draw a crowd, but we were struggling, and the problem was those two audiences that we were targeted towards, movers and corporates, they just didn't have enough incentive to adopt what we're offering. Even though, I'm biased, but our corporate model there's nothing else like it in the industry, nothing close. I think we've really cracked the code. But nonetheless, I could go to a corporate buyer that's spending 10 to 20 million a year on international moving, and almost certainly guarantee them $2 to $4 million savings. And I just assumed when launching the company, well, that's obvious.
Right.
You can take that. Well, not so fast, maybe not, because they have many other incentives. I think the human resources department might be better named the human compliance department, because that's really what their incentives are. And they have to deal with all of this compliance issues on tax and immigration and accounting and all of this stuff. And that's really where the decision making lay for our product is HR, aka mobility.
Right.
And we just weren't, even though we could deliver major savings and benefits, it just didn't make their top 5 or top 10 priorities to make that move. So that was kind of the epiphany earlier this year. It's like we didn't get that next level scale up that we hoped by going towards those audience, the movers and the corporates. So we need to pivot towards a different space, and that different space, in short, is the consumer market.
I want to pause for a second there, because I think that's a really good, like, almost cliffhanger of where it's going to go. But I want to reflect a little bit on the initial situation. I mean, how many businesses went through that moment of fear, or at least a major uncertainty when COVID hit? I remember speaking to law firms, immigration lawyers that were like, I'm going to have to shut my firm down.
Right.
I don't know what to do. And I think maybe some people did pivot. For sure, there were a number of immigration lawyers that figured out a way to make do, or in some cases be successful throughout COVID. But international moves are international moves, I mean, and so it's, I think one thing to note is, the situation where I think we read TechCrunch articles about mergers and acquisitions, and we always think it was just the logical next step of a growing company. Sometimes it's, to keep the company alive during a scenario where you have no control. I mean, you had no control over COVID, so I think that's something to keep in mind for folks. At the same time, what that means is you're coming into potential negotiations, kind of in a position of desperation. I mean, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not fun. I mean, no one wants to be in that position. But look, as a business owner, you've spent so much of your life on this, right? You quit your job. You took out, you took the risk of bootstrapping this thing. You want to see it succeed. This is not just, this is part of your life and your, who you are as a person in a way. At least I feel that way. And so, just the thought of like going through and having those discussions with potential acquirer or potential investor to keep the business alive is the reality for many businesses. It's not, again, it's not the sexy, like, $800 million cash Google acquisition that everyone thinks about or hears about in the news, but it is probably quite common where businesses do what they need to do to survive, surely in a way that's favorable to you. It's not like you'd be right. But so I want to note that, but it's so crazy how life works, right? Thinking back on it, I can't imagine how stressful that year plus was for you guys. But thinking back on it, it's like, that the deal was put on pause and you're probably like, oh crap, that's not good. This was going to be our lifeline. And then new management comes in, you're like, oh no. And then all this stuff is happening. And it, like, you can look at that in a vacuum and say that's terrible. But then at the same time, as you said, things were rebounding. And so now sort of the level of, need for this is starting to shift, right? You're no longer at a place where you quote unquote need this to survive. You're now like, oh, well, actually, no, we can get back on our own 2 feet. Which I think is, man, what is lucky in a way. I don't know if you can call it luck or whatever, but it was great outcome.
It was
so
of course, yeah,
totally. And like you talk about roller coaster. I mean, that is literally you were at a huge high in the end of 2019, early 2020, and then just a serious dip. I mean, that's like going down the roller coaster 2020, and then it starts to pick back up, and it's like, I think that's something founders or entrepreneurs don't talk about a lot. Is just the emotional roller coaster of the whole damn thing. That's like peak roller coaster, but even day to day or week to week, you can experience ups and downs like that. So I wanted to just think or talk through that a little bit. Because I think it's so important, that aspect of your journey is so important because it leads really nicely into how this merger that actually went through and is a success, how it kind of compares to that first almost, merger or acquisition.
It was night and day.
So night and day. So we talked through the night. We went through the night. Now let's talk about the day. So, 2021, 2022, you're starting to rebound, but you're not seeing the growth that maybe you were expecting, right? Especially coming, let's say, even if you take out that entire dip, what you were seeing in 2019, the excitement for that trajectory, et cetera, you kind of were maybe expecting it to pick back up at that rate. And I'm sure it was picking back up, but maybe not at the rate that the company wanted. So then you started, this second iteration, M&A, version 2.0 for PricePoint. Talk a little bit about how that came up, because now you're talking, with Cend, it's been, I guess like a really, really positive experience. How did you get to know them? How did you how did you get on their radar? Talk a little bit about that, if you can.
Yeah. So we have our organization and our team has a lot of career overlap with their organization. Worked together in prior jobs. And actually, the CEO of Cend, Jim Petzel, he's actually the guy that hired me into the industry. So wow. credit or blame goes to him. But so I literally knew him from while I was still in college and got recruited in to where he was one of the recruiters for a new program that they were starting. That's how I got into the industry. And we were already engaged in a conversation with Cend because with what they were doing, they saw a lot of value in what we're doing. And the short version of what we bring to the market is instantaneous, real pricing, automated pricing. You're moving from Chicago to London, you've got 10,000 pound shipment. We can give you a price right now like that. And that's amazingly uncommon in this industry still. Instantaneous pricing is still not the norm. So I still haven't even, I would never have thought 2023, it'd still be such an analog process outside of what we can do. But point being, they were interested in, they were building a online marketplace for moving services and a couple other things. So they saw the value in what we could do. And we were in talks about how could we partner together. We were struggling to find the right fit because on our end, we already had our development priorities. Any dev company has like a 2 to 3 year waiting list of here's all the things we want to do, but you've got to ruthlessly prioritize those. So then when there's a party that comes in that even though you really want to partner with them, it's like, well, we do have these other priorities. And so, how do we get you into that priority It's either that company has to be able to pay us enough money to make it worth our while from a revenue standpoint, or if we are deferring revenue because we think it's such a big opportunity to partner, well, okay, sometimes you do that. But as we talked about a little bit the other day, you might choose a partnership and you spend a year or two developing it, and then you finally get it there, and then it doesn't blossom like you thought. So that's a big risk challenge. But the point is, we were already engaged with Cend, trying to figure out how we could help them, but couldn't find kind of the right level, the right prioritization. But then when we had this thought of, okay, we need to pivot our focus, look more towards the consumer space. That's the space that Cend was already targeting. So we did talk to a handful of companies that we potentially were interested in merging or getting acquired. But Cend was one that we already had a dialogue going. And because we had that career background of shared staff, and that I knew Jim very well, and I don't know anyone in the industry that has a higher integrity than Jim. So based on the past experience of, this publicly traded company, that could I trust them? No. But I knew I couldn't trust them. So we were, that deal was more, can we trust the structure of the agreement? There was just a lot more inherent trust in going down this avenue with them. So once the thought actually got uttered between us, I think it was maybe about a 1 month window where we all actively explored the idea of, would this make sense? And then when we got to green light, we think this is worth doing, then we got the deal done in about a month from there. Wow. So really fast timeline, but it was largely because there was a lot of inherent trust, and we knew each other, and credibility on both sides of the table, I think.
Yeah. It's so interesting how much that plays a role, right? Because you'd think due diligence, okay, you look at P&Ls, you look at the stack, you look at, your roadmap, your client list, that should all take the same amount of time. But actually a lot of that time does go into kind of getting to know each other, building that trust, trying to use some data as a proxy for trust, that you don't really care about that data, but the data is important for you to build trust. And here you had that. I guess you've been on each other's radars probably for the past 20 years. I'm sure he was, he knew what you were doing, hopefully with PricePoint, and maybe saw the, actually, I'm curious, did you ever like touch base throughout the years since, he pulled you into the industry? And I don't know, did that ever like just purely like career, progress, you want to get coffee type of thing?
Yeah. Jim and I in particular, our orbits kind of intersected quite a bit through our careers. In fact, before Jim started his company, he was sort of an executive. He was an executive level at a variety of the larger moving companies around the U.S. And one of them, they became one of our largest mover clients while he was on the mover side of the table. So the organization he was leading then adopted our platform, our mover to mover platform, for their internal purposes. And that was 5 to 8 years ago, maybe. So yeah, we were just naturally kind of in touch with each other through our careers. And
that's amazing too, because that means I presume he, or at least the company he worked at, had experience with PricePoint. I mean, as the product, right? So it's not even like they were trying to learn.
He had more experience with me. And
fair.
Yeah. Because when we were both at the original company where we started, and I was doing that corporate pricing function, he was in sales, business development. So we were in frequent partnership with each other, trying to win big corporate clients. So he kind of knew my street cred and what I could do on the pricing side. So kind of that credibility came with me.
I love that. We've had a few clients come on board with Laborless because, a new person who joined the company, whether it's, head of mobility or somebody who is, kind of, let's say, an immigration specialist who actually puts the applications together, who had used Laborless from a previous company, are like, guys, you got to get on this, good team, good product, etc. And it's always it feels so good to get those kind of clients. It's not even about the size. Sometimes they're really quite small, but just that interaction with the new prospect who's like, hey, somebody's joined our team. They told us how great you are. Can we get a demo? Can we learn more? And you just realize, you take a look back in that moment, it's great. But then you take a look back and you say, that time I replied to that person when they were at their prior role really quickly and, fixed their issue quickly or whatever, that left such a positive impression on them that they were willing to recommend us at their new employer. And so it just goes to show how important customer service is. It doesn't matter who they are. They could have come from a small company and then as their career progressed, became head of mobility at a big company. So if you didn't care about them when they were at the small company, right? Now you don't have them as an ally when they're, a few years down the road at the big company. It's so important to care. It's so important to keep those relationships and like really, I would say even go above and beyond, right? To support every single client to the extent that you can.
Yeah. Relationships, not my strong suit, but the relationships that I have that are close and strong. Yeah. I think I've cultivated those well, and they matter. You do rely on other people believing in you for sure.
And look, it's not just relationships. You've built a great product and a great team. And it doesn't have to be that, oh, Ryan responded to my email quickly. It's PricePoint did, and I think that's the thing that really matters. I mean, I'm so proactive because Laborless is a fairly small company. So people do sort of have to interact with me. But, if and as we grow and their staff and, they're the ones that are responding, it's really about making sure that they provide that same level of service so that the whole, the organization is leaving a really good impression. So I wanted to note that because I think it's really, really important. So you had, you started this discussion. It went really well. Obviously amazing, this sort of commingling, if you will, of people and just past relationships and how wonderful it is to be able to call somebody and say like, hey, remember, all those times we've worked together. We're actually in this new position where we have a company and we think that it'd go well with yours. It sounds like the deal went really well. What are you thinking about now that you've merged, with Cend, and Cend is a growing kind of moving marketplace, a little bit more B2C. Like, what are your thoughts about maybe the future of PricePoint or maybe the future of moving, corporate moving in general within the context of this merger?
Yeah. So we went down a pretty big rabbit hole there. So going back to, what the change in our vision was, we're not getting enough traction with the movers and the corporate buyers. But I've believed for years that this industry is going to follow in the footsteps of the travel industry. It's just a couple decades behind. And that basically means a migration from sort of corporate curated service, like a travel agent is what the travel industry used to be. And now it's a do-it-yourself through Expedia. So that's a migration towards the actual end consumer who's doing the transaction. So we're already seeing that in the corporate space in the sense of there's a increasing prevalence of lump sum programs, which is sort of really a hybrid of corporate and consumer. The corporate is still funding the move, but they're giving Mr. Smith $20,000 to go buy his own moving services out in the marketplace. So it's corporate funded, but it's being actualized by the actual end consumer. So it's clear that that's where the industry is going. And that's what I felt we needed to pivot towards, is go towards that consumer space, because the industry is definitely going there. And where we were a bit disappointed and frustrated that our target audiences didn't value enough what we could do in the terms of transparent, instant, guaranteed pricing. While they didn't value that, which was a surprise, but in hindsight, I get it. Who does value that is the end consumer. They do want a price right now. They do want it to be competitive. So it's like, that's the target audience that would inherently value our unique ability. The problem, though, is targeting that kind of audience. That's a whole different type of company that you need to be. We do have an all-star team on our staff, but they're experts in the targets that we were going towards. We didn't have good expertise in the consumer space. Meanwhile, if you are trying to target the consumer space, that's where you often get more into you better have a VC behind you to spend X million on SEO, right? If you're actually going down the consumer space. So we felt we needed to pivot there, but we couldn't just suddenly decide we're going to go to that space. It would take who knows how many years just to like become competent, and you need big investment money behind you to do it. So it's like we need to merge or be acquired by someone that's already going down that space. And to be clear, we're not abandoning what we're doing on the mover and corporate side.
Right.
They're still the best platforms out there, and we're still supporting them. And more companies want to join on. We're still doing that, but we're navigating that migration to go also towards the consumer space. And that Cend was already making headway down that space and did have the right kind of staff to go down there. So that was the key to it. Is it was a mutual bridge of they can give us access to that consumer end of the industry, but we can give them that holy grail. That's really important, because that's why they were engaging with us before the mergers. They recognized we need to be sharp with pricing. We need to have a good online experience for the people that are coming to the website and want to price. So that was the mutual interest from their end.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so, I mean, in a way, it's kind of like a win-win, because you're going to continue to grow your corporate B2B side of things. I'm sure it'll continue to happen, even if it's just organic. And then now you have almost a second, revenue stream, if you will, or a second vertical in the business, which is awesome.
Yeah, and there's that natural bridge where we, like we said, the corporates themselves are going more and more towards lump sum, and there's no good solution for that out there. The industry has really struggled. The closest thing that there is the reload companies will cut a check for that lump sum, but then the actual person who's moving is just going out into the wilderness and they're Googling moving companies.
Right.
So that's part of the opportunity of what we can do. And we already have, I don't think I get into too much detail here myself, but we already have partnership with some of Cend's backers that we have access to a massive pipeline of lump sum spend that currently is only getting serviced by, well, here's a check. What we'll be able to give them is, here's a check and here's a marketplace where you can get that Expedia-like environment and choose from different suppliers rather than just going out into Google. And obviously there's a lot of shadiness that happens in the moving industry when you're just Googling it and finding Joe Schmo mover down the street. So what's pretty cool about it is, I think the end state is that pure consumer, capture that pure consumer, but we have this little bit of a shortcut cheat code where we can do that corporate lump sum, which is really a consumer, but it's a pipeline of consumers that you don't have to go do the SEO thing. It's going to just come through this reload level source of, they're going to be able to feed lump sum leads into us, and we can convert them and give them that actual marketplace rather than trying to go out into the market and figure it out for themselves.
And since I have, there are a number of sort of in-house mobility or relocation folks that listen to the show, the idea would be, in that sort of B2C model, if they're providing lump sum moves, they would say, as part of supporting a relocated employee or somebody who's going to relocate, they would say, here's price, like go on PricePoint and then you figure it out. So it's your responsibility to find the movers and to pay for it. Here's a check. It's your responsibility to find the movers. But instead of, to your point, just saying good luck, they'll say, here's PricePoint. We're going to refer you to it. And then, but the interaction with PricePoint is by the kind of quote unquote consumer, the individual who's relocating.
Yeah. And they have that consumer in this marketplace will have, it's not just one company. They'll have a variety of companies that they can choose from. And here's the really cool part. If it's for that mobility company that is referring their transferees, those companies do tend to work with, let's say a panel of different moving companies. Let's say a large corporate buyer works with 3 or 4 different suppliers that they've vetted and that they have a trusted relationship, we can perfectly well bring those suppliers into this marketplace so that the corporate buyer is still having those moves potentially being serviced by the suppliers that they've already vetted and that they know they've got the phone number that they can call if there's a problem. So again, it's like they're not just going out and finding random moving companies. It can actually be a panel of trusted suppliers to service that lump sum environment.
Would you, in that instance, would that transferee be limited to only being able to choose from those trusted suppliers? Like, are they almost getting a subset of what PricePoint would provide if, so instead of seeing all of the movers that are on PricePoint, it's just only that subset within, that
I think that's up to the corporate client. But presumably, I mean, if they're willing to just send them out into the wilderness with a lump sum check,
that's fair.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't care too much, but it's just an extra bonus where they can, as a mobility department, say, hey, here are the companies that we do know and we do trust. We'd recommend you give them the first look, but nothing is stopping for that transferee from even going outside of our platform. And you want to go Google it, you're free to do so. But, you're giving them that sort of curated marketplace of known suppliers.
Right. And the idea,
of course, give you a price right now, not 2 days from now.
Exactly.
Right now.
That's what I was going to say. And not even like upon arrival, or, sometimes it's one of those things where you get a price and then you figure it into your budget and then suddenly it goes up because there's this thing and that thing. And so I think people who haven't moved don't realize how insanely frustrating and angering it can be, where all of these things, and then suddenly you're getting these surprise fees or surprise, we call
them supplemental charges. The industry calls them accessorials. But it's like, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Right. Of course.
The suppliers are forced to do these things.
Right.
And that's been always what we've tried to solve, is like, it's all about incentives. And if you remove the incentives to play those games, then the games go away.
Yep. And then you just have a cordial transaction with a person who needs your services. And, awesome. So I guess if I could end this, this conversation, which has been so fascinating, thank you for sharing it. I want to, well, actually, I guess before we end the conversation, because I have a kind of maybe a reflective question for you. I just wanted to thank the sponsor for the show one more time, for allowing this to happen. Again, the sponsor for the GMI Rocket show is Lex Reception, their legal intake, reception and client support service that work with immigration lawyers and other lawyers and professionals to provide them a 24/7 legal answering specialists who can, answer the phone and they know what they're saying. So it's not like a random call center, so that busy law firm doesn't miss any client inbound calls from clients or prospects. Lex Reception provides outbound services where they can reach out to folks on behalf of the law firm to help them become clients. And as a tech platform, they integrate with a number of platforms that immigration lawyers are already using, again, including Clio, Practice Panther, LawPay. So for folks listening to the show, you do get $250 off your first month of service with Lex Reception. Follow the link in the show notes for that, or just reach out to Lex Reception and say you heard about them on the GMI Rocket show. So thank you, Lex Reception, for your support. Okay, Ryan, as we end this amazing, interesting episode, I'm curious, now that you've gone through this process and you've gone through sort of the process twice in a way. I mean, you kind of, the first merger or acquisition scenario didn't really work out. And then you kind of found this secondary one, which is like amazing and fits so well, and is bringing PricePoint into its next, phase, I suppose, of growth. Looking back on it, I know it's pretty recent, so you don't even have to look back too far. But what's your most recent kind of word of advice that you can pull, or that you've been maybe leveraging as you've gone through this process? Either something you've heard from someone that has been really crucial to you in this like latest stage of the business. What's a piece of advice that you've been using that you maybe could pass on to others?
I think what comes to mind is I didn't quarterback a whole lot of the actual nuts and bolts of getting the deal done. Fortunately, I didn't have to because we had a good team of people around that I could outsource this part of it to the CFO and this part of it to the accountant, and Ben would run with this, that, and the other. And at the end of the day, it was being able to trust those different parties to like break down whatever the particular part of the deal was, and explain it to me like I'm dumb, and simplify it for me. That helped us move it forward quickly as well. Like I did not have any interest in, like, in either case, trying to become an expert on M&A. That's kind of my instinct with many things, is if I'm trying to learn something, I roll up my sleeves and go really deep and try to figure it out. But that would be my advice, is surround yourself with people that can translate it for you. There are people that deal with M&As all the time and they get real expertise, but when you only get exposure to it once or twice, it's like, don't expect yourself to become an expert, but have the right people around you that can translate it. So, for years we've never had a full-time CFO, but we have a part-time CFO, but he has always been a huge strategic advisor for us. So just having, likewise, accounting, likewise, Ben had a close friend from college who was our M&A lawyer. And so we fortunately had the right people that could kind of chaperone us through the process and tell us where the pitfalls are.
Yeah, that's great advice. Honestly, you can even say the same thing for a founder or a leader in any case. If you want to get really start marketing, for example. I mean, I'm thinking about this from a marketing standpoint. Don't try to become a marketing expert unless you want to refocus your energy. Get someone on board who can help you, who's already an expert. I think a lot of founders try to do everything on their own, and then they can't really get to anything with meaningful success, and they don't move forward.
And they get severely burned out.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. So I love that. Well, Ryan, thank you. This has been a really fascinating, really, really interesting conversation. I thank you for, congratulations again. And I thank you for coming on and sharing your kind of the story. And it's really cool that it was so recent that, all these details are so informative. And I'm sure for any folks listening who are either thinking about or potentially even going through an M&A activity of their own, hopefully they can pull a lot of nuggets of wisdom from here. So thank you. This has been awesome, and excited to see what the future holds for PricePoint.
Well, thank you again.
All right. Awesome episode. Thank you guys so much for being here. We got a few comments, so I want to bring them up. Josh Shacknow said, looking forward to another episode. Hope you guys are doing great. Thank you, Josh. We had a LinkedIn user. I think your privacy doesn't allow us to see who you are, but wrote, very interesting hearing from some of the inner workings, and excited to see where it goes. Congrats. So thank you. We have Paul Vicente says, like most approaches to lump sum, there's more than one solution. This is an amazing partnership. And other solutions are on the way too. So more to come. So exciting to see so much movement and progress in the industry overall. So thank you, Paul, for your comment. Thanks everybody who is here for sticking around, for your questions. Such an interesting episode, and I'm really excited to bring on more guests. It's not going to be every week or every other week because you have to, of course, get folks who have gone through an M&A to sometimes even to get the okay from their higher ups to talk about it to some extent. But I will be bringing as many of these episodes as possible to the show. I think it's important and interesting for us and for the industry to shed some light on how all of this works. So for now, until next time, I think this is the last show of the year. So have a wonderful holiday season to everybody. I didn't want to do more episodes while everyone's sort of traveling for holidays. See you in January. And so have a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful holiday season to everybody here, and stay safe out there, most importantly. Peace out.